Welcome to another episode of the GunBlog VarietyCast with your hosts, Sean Sorrentino and Erin Paulette.
Welcome to episode 114 of the GunBlog VarietyCast, a proud member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. How are you doing, Erin?
I have had a rough week, and I'm going to go into that in greater detail in my segment. How are you, Sean?
Yeah, well, I've kind of had a rough week too, but it's not really me that's had the rough week. I tagged something to the end of the last podcast because I went hunting after the end of the recording of last podcast where I had a great deal of success. I shot a deer. It was really awesome. And I even cooked it up for dinner, so that was pretty cool. The problem is, a couple of days ago, I texted Jeff, the guy who took me hunting, set me up, helped me, and I say helped me, but he basically, the parts where he wasn't holding my hand through the field dressing, he just basically did for me, like 85% of the process. This was Wednesday morning at like 8 o'clock. I texted Jeff and said, hey, can I come out this afternoon and throw some corn out to bait the deer in? Because North Carolina, you're allowed to hunt over bait. Can I throw some deer corn out and then come out Friday and shoot any deer who happen to be trying to eat my corn? Oh, sure, come on out. I sent him a text message about 4:30. I'll be out at about 5:30. No response. I get out to his house. There's only one car there. I knock on the door, no answer. I know where his father-in-law lives, and I had seen his father-in-law standing out in front of the house. And I really don't feel comfortable just wandering onto somebody's property and throwing the deer corn out in front of the deer stand. I mean, like, it's another person's property, you know?
Yeah.
So I drive over to the father-in-law's house. It's like, 2 houses down. Excuse me, sir, are you Jeff's father-in-law? Yes, I am. Well, nobody's at the house, and I was the guy that was here hunting on Saturday with Jeff. He said it was okay for me to throw some deer corn out so that I could come back on Friday and go hunting with him. Did you know that Jeff was in the hospital? He had a heart attack this morning. So apparently, right after I got done texting with him, he had a pretty serious heart attack and ended up in the hospital.
Yikes.
Unfortunately, I have no way to contact him aside from his texts, which, funny enough, they don't wake you up in the hospital to say, hey, you've got a text message.
Darned inconsiderate.
I know, seriously. Or going back to the house and beating on the door, assuming somebody's home and saying, hey, how's Jeff doing? I feel kind of uncomfortable doing that. I mean, at some point, I'm kind of going to have to. I think I'm going to do that this weekend. I'm going to go, knock on the door and say, how's Jeff doing?
The social contract in these situations calls for you to drop by with a casserole or other sort of prepared food item for the family. And so I figure if you've got some food for them to eat, you are permitted to knock on their door or knock on the father-in-law's door and find out what's going on.
Ooh, knock on the father-in-law's door. That might be a good idea.
Yeah, I hope Jeff is all right.
I do too. They got him to the hospital. That's like 99% of the solution to that situation anyway. If they get you alive to the hospital, mostly they can do wonders as long as nothing is completely destroyed. I mean, my father had triple bypass surgery and he was up and walking in the space of time. I was on emergency leave. I went and saw him in the hospital in ICU and I saw him walking around his own house. It was that dramatic. So, I mean, cross my fingers. Anybody's a praying sort. Pray for him. Pray for his family.
And it sounds like he's a relatively young man since his father-in-law is still alive.
Yep, he's about my age, I'd say.
Okay. Yeah, I'd say he's got really good chances. So, yeah, definitely sending out, good thoughts and prayers for him.
So why don't we kick off the rest of the show?
Yeah, let's do that. Beth seems to have a knack for taking ladies out shooting. In her Pacifiers and Peacemakers segment, she shares her experiences in taking a group of women shooting and talks about what they and she gained from it.
I really love my job. I love being able to take people out to the shooting range and give them some of those basic skills for shooting. But I especially love taking out a group of women to the range and not only giving them those basics of shooting, but also helping them find that new source of confidence. It's honestly an amazing phenomenon that happens pretty much every time I see ladies out on the range. Whether it's their first time or maybe they haven't shot in a while, their faces just absolutely light up. Yeah, they might be a little scared or they might be a little unsure, especially at first. But as soon as you give them those skills and those basics, and you set them on their own with that confidence and empowerment, they just absolutely soar. And it is so amazing and awesome to watch. Luckily, I had the opportunity to do that not too long ago when we took out a group of 15 ladies, some of whom had never touched a firearm in their lives, and some who had shot before on and off, but certainly not regularly. And we took them to the outdoor range and gave them the opportunity to grow those skills, to build those skills, and again, of course, to build that confidence. But what is always really interesting to me as well, when it comes to a group of women, what is it that makes them want to come out to do this in the first place? What is it that changes their mind or opens up their mind to go out to the shooting range and give firearms a chance? Now, with this group of women, I heard a lot of variety of answers. Some of them had shot before and they just wanted an opportunity to try it again because they just don't have that chance. They don't have time, or they don't have the resources, or maybe they don't have the people to go with. Speaking of people to go with, some of the ladies did it because, well, their friends were, and they felt like, there's strength in numbers and there's more confidence in numbers, and women love to have these kinds of experiences together. So you'll see that they will bond with one another and grow with one another, even if it's a new or scary or even uncomfortable kind of scenario. In fact, this group of women likes to get together to do all sorts of things, such as painting or crafts, but they also like to go rock climbing or maybe even rafting. So shooting was something as well that was a little bit more adventurous, but something they all wanted to try together. There were also some women in the room who were very serious about learning more so that they could be confident and they could be comfortable with firearms in their homes, in their lives, and quite possibly on their bodies. We had a lot of ladies interested in understanding what is the process of getting that concealed carry weapons permit, and what is the process of finding something that works for them as far as a holster, where it goes, how it works, what it's for, and of course what firearm might work for them as well. Beyond that, though, there were many women in there that just wanted to understand the mindset. What does it take to be able to carry a firearm every day, or to pursue the firearm safety and training that is necessary to be able to be safe and responsible? And of course, some of the ladies were there just because they thought that shooting would be a nice, fun activity to do. Ultimately, though, I think it's very interesting that we make note of the fact that you don't have to have any specific reason to go and try shooting. There doesn't have to be some kind of explanation. There doesn't have to be a story, if you will. Now, granted, there are a lot of wonderful, powerful, amazing, and inspiring stories out there. I have friends who have gotten into firearms and have pursued firearms even into their careers because of some horrible things that they've gone through in their lives, some horrifying, awful situations and scenarios that brought them to the reasoning that they needed to be able to protect themselves and their families. But it's always great to be assured that you don't have to have that. There doesn't have to be a scary moment. There doesn't have to be a restraining order. There doesn't have to be a person in your life of whom you are scared. To go out and to learn about safe and responsible firearms, shooting, ownership, and carrying is something that anybody can do. It's not abnormal. It's not weird. And it was great to be able to reassure these women that they were doing the right thing, that we should always arm ourselves with knowledge. We should always be interested in the understanding of things like firearms, especially if they're in your home already. I know that was one of the things that inspired me initially. Being involved with the industry and hearing about it and having guns wasn't enough. I needed to know how they worked, how they functioned. That way, in case of any kind of emergency situation, I would understand what was happening and I could use that tool if necessary for self-defense. So hopefully these ladies have been inspired. Hopefully their eyes have been opened. I know they had an outstanding time. I had an outstanding time. I always do. And they're going to take that confidence and that learning and move forward with it. Granted, some of them will not make the decision to buy a firearm, own a firearm, or carry one, but I know that others will. And that's what's so awesome and exciting about this job and what we do, being able to either be a catalyst or a mediator or an instructor, or someone that helps inspire, grow, or train. So thanks for letting me share. Thanks to the ladies who came out to the range. And until next time, y'all stay safe and be well armed.
You can read more from Beth at usconcealedcarry.com/blog and click on Pacifiers and Peacemakers in the left sidebar.
This podcast runs on your donations. Go to GunBlogVarietyCast.com and click on the donate or the subscribe button in the right sidebar. You can make a one-time donation of any amount or subscribe for as little as $2 a month. That doesn't sound like much, but we pay our server costs monthly, and a little help from you is a big help to us.
Felons Behaving Badly. Forsyth Medical Center shooting. 2 found dead in hospital room. The bodies of suspect 27 and Sequina Lanique Cutchin, 28, were found about 11:20 p.m. in a third-floor room of the hospital off Silas Creek Parkway. No one else was injured. Cutchin died of gunshot wounds to the head, while suspect died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound, Winston-Salem police said Tuesday. Police told the Associated Press suspect entered the room, shot Cutchin, and then turned the gun on himself. Investigators seized a .380 caliber semi-automatic handgun that suspect had in his possession. It was the only weapon involved in the incident, police said. Cutchin had recently given birth in the hospital and was recovering when the shooting happened, family members told WXII. The premature baby is in the hospital's neonatal intensive care unit. Suspect's mother said her son sounded happy when he first called her Saturday. However, his mood changed drastically by Saturday night as she heard in a call around 11:15 p.m. He said, "Mom, I love you. I love my brothers and sisters. I love my nieces and nephews. Next thing I know, I heard a gunshot and the phone dropped," she said. Along with the newborn, Cutchin leaves behind a 6-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old son. Suspect was a convicted felon after being found guilty of robbery with a dangerous weapon in 2004. The couple was together for less than a year, and according to court documents, they had a violent domestic history. Suspect was charged with assault with a deadly weapon and battery on an unborn child after investigators allege he ran over a pregnant Cutchin with an SUV in December. On April 14th, suspect was charged with communicating threats after investigators allege he told Cutchin, "I will blow your brains out." He was released on bail April 20th, and a judge ordered him not to have contact with Cutchin. There was no 50B domestic violence protective order between suspect and Cutchin at the time of the shooting. Winston-Salem police said they offered Cutchin counseling and other assistance several times, but she declined. Suspect mom said suspect sounded fed up Saturday after saying Cutchin was trying to take my rights. While suspect's mom alleges suspect never touched Cutchin and Cutchin filed false accusations with police, she said she doesn't condone what happened. The investigation closed only a very small part of the hospital Sunday morning. Denise Mahal, chief operating officer of parent company Novant Health, said in a statement Sunday, "The hospital is deeply saddened by the events and extend our deepest sympathies to the families." The hospital released an updated statement on Monday. Novant Health Forsyth Medical Center has an experienced public safety department with security and incident response protocols developed for our medical center. We work closely with law enforcement to ensure the safety of staff, patients, and visitors. For maximum effectiveness, we do not disclose the specifics of our security measures publicly. Because there is an ongoing investigation into Saturday's incident by the Winston-Salem Police Department, we are referring further questions to them.
As terrible as this is, honestly, the first thing that popped into my head was, well, at least he didn't kill the kids, which is what happened the last time somebody killed a mother.
The part that leaps out to me is Novant Health Forsyth Medical Center has an experienced public safety department with security and incident response protocols developed for our medical center. We work closely with local law enforcement to ensure the safety of our staff, patients, and visitors. How well did that work?
Well, we can see how well it worked.
And how insured were the staff, patients, and visitors? Not very insured.
Nope. I mean, unless they have metal detectors, which apparently they don't.
How many times have you gone into a hospital and gone through any sort of security whatsoever? And if somebody tried to put metal detectors up in a hospital and run everybody through airport security, there'd be a revolution. We'd beat people down for that crap. So basically, they put up a sign and say, "Don't carry your gun," and then don't provide any kind of security because they can't.
How do you defend against this? I mean, he had a .380, he had a pocket pistol. That's really easy to smuggle in. So I don't know how you could defend against this unless you're doing, like, Israeli-style pat-downs for everyone going in, which isn't going to happen.
There's nothing that could have stopped this. Let's do that thing that the anti-gunners like to do. Well, none of our security procedures would have done anything to stop this, but let's stop the next big problem. The next big problem is not that some guy's going to go in and murder his girlfriend or something. The next problem is somebody's going to wander in and walk through the emergency department and start murdering all the doctors and patients in there. Or somebody's going to, which happens all the time in emergency rooms, is going to get mad that his wife, sister, brother-in-law, whatever, is not getting proper medical care and start threatening and pull out a weapon, and there's going to be nobody there to stop him from taking somebody hostage. And I am going to be there because my wife fell down the stairs or something, and I'm going to have to, not have a gun. I've got a pocket knife and maybe my pepper spray, and my wife is immobilized with her busted leg. What am I going to do? Pick her up and carry her out? What are all these other patients going to do? Because I have to follow a freaking sign. That's all this does. And so we already know that this guy has a felony record, but just for form's sake, let's read off what he's been convicted of according to the North Carolina Department of Corrections. Intimidate witnesses, felon class H, 4 counts common law robbery, felon class G, and robbery with a dangerous weapon, felon class D.
And apparently he ran over a pregnant woman. That's not in there.
Right, well, he hasn't been convicted of that, and never will be because he killed himself. So we've got a guy who has 6 convictions for felonies, running around with a .380 pocket pistol, murdering his girlfriend who just gave birth in a hospital that almost certainly has a sign that says no guns allowed. And the response from the health center is, we have protocols developed for our medical center to ensure the safety of our staff, patients, and visitors.
Sure they do.
I have 2 words for you. And the first word refers to the male of the bovine species. Barron returns from his epic RV adventure across the West. What tech tools did he use to make it a smooth journey for his family? He tells you in
Tech Tips, Tech Tips, Tech Tips.
You are damaging my calm.
Tech Tips with the Barron.
So Barron, how was your vacation?
Well, Sean, thanks to my deep belief in the 6 Ps, proper planning prevents piss-poor performance, this trip was uneventful. I clocked 3,750 miles in 2 weeks, came home to what was supposed to be the storm of the century, and did so hauling a trailer with a kid barely a year old.
So normally this is a tech segment. What sort of technology did you use to make your planning easier?
I had 2 tools which I used fairly heavily. One is a free service called Road Trippers. If you're planning a road trip, I highly recommend using it. It allows you to put your start and destination and will find you anything within your route. We're talking gas stations, grocery stores, campgrounds, RV parks, hotels, not just services either. It can help you discover attractions that may be in your travel area that you weren't even aware of, from museums to parks. We even leveraged that tool in the one incident of the trip. Let me start off by saying, as an engineer, I have a habit of building in margin. In this case, the kiddo's schedule helped reinforce the margin. Well, the day we were leaving Colorado was the longest of the bunch. We left with a headwind to boot. I expected to burn through 1/3 to 1/2 a tank of diesel. It was 2/3 that I ate, though, by the time we reached the gas stop. Normally, I was using truck stops. Due to the route, though, I wasn't going to get one on the stop. Since I ate more fuel, I didn't have the extra reserve I had planned. Additionally, I had a mountain pass between me and the next scheduled stop, about 1/2 a tank of fuel away. When I arrived at the planned stop, I see we have a problem. In order to fill up at the pump, I'd have to block the road with my trailer. That's not happening. I snake out of there, and seriously, I'm glad I'm comfortable towing, because I had to fold in a mirror and I cleared with about 1/2 an inch of clearance on each side getting out of the gas station. It's on my list of places not to go back.
Wait, this seems like the makings of a bad horror movie. Getting stranded on a mountain pass after running out of gas with a baby in tow?
Yeah, for us, we were probably some of the more heavily armed and prepared of the bunch. We also had some additional tools at hand. Now, Road Trippers has a nice feature where you can share the route with somebody else and work on planning it together. I had shared the route previously with my wife. She promptly started looking for common names associated with truck stops. We found one 5 miles off our route just up the road. I pulled in with a sigh of relief. Nice, easy pump with a big-ass loop around the back that I could easily get through with the trailer. Without that handy little tool, it would have been much more difficult to find the solution to our problem.
So you said there were 2 tools. What was the other one?
To fill everyone in, I have a big fifth wheel. Total, my gross weight when loaded is about 23,000 pounds. I'm about 55 feet long, bumper to bumper, and my clearance is about 13 feet 6 inches tall, and I'm 102 inches wide. Heavy enough and tall enough, I really need to pay attention to my route. Speaking of which, always double and triple check your route with the latest info if you have something that big. While route planning, I found old documentation on the Colorado DOT's website. In the end, it didn't really matter since we took a different route anyway, but the website said a tunnel was one height. The PDF of the entire state said something different. Upon further investigation, they never updated the PDF. Back to the tool though. I actually bought an app called Copilot for my phone that does a bunch of things for me. It stores the maps locally, i.e. I have to download them in advance, takes into account my rig length, my rig width, my rig height, and my rig weight. It also flags me away from hazardous material limitations. For those who don't know, some tunnels ban RVs because of propane. I'm actually hit doubly because I also have an additional 30 gallons of fuel on my trailer. So on top of all the routing I do in advance, I make sure that my route and Copilot agree. This was additionally helpful since on the second day I had an unexpected construction detour. All vehicles over 10,000 pounds take the next exit.
Oh man, in a car that'd be a minor inconvenience. On a 55-foot long, 23,000 pound rig short on fuel, that could be a disaster.
Yep, in this case, it was an additional 60 miles between stops, and thankfully I had the fuel to deal with it. Initially, Copilot was just generally confused, but eventually it redirected and life was good. It was also beneficial because tools like Waze or Google Maps don't care about height or weight. My wife was using Waze as a backup, and there were a few times it had us going a different route. One of those times, my wife thought Waze was right and Copilot was wrong. Except I was back in Washington, and well, I know all the bridges and tunnels that are under 13 feet 6 inches in the state. Copilot was doing its job and directing me around one that was in the middle of the town. I spent a lot of time searching for this kind of tool. The closest I could find was a dedicated RV GPS unit that was $300+. Copilot, if I remember correctly, was all of $10 and regularly gets map updates.
So were the tools worth it?
The tools and time spent planning were worth every penny. Of the 3 issues we had while traveling, all were minor, easily dealt with, and didn't obstruct from the fun of a vacation.
So your plan wasn't to star in Naked and Afraid, family style on this trip?
Nope. Instead, days in the Cody Firearms Museum, days spent hunting prairie dogs with friends, and lastly, days spent exploring Moab, Utah. We got to focus on why we were there and the beauty of getting there than the details that would have otherwise diminished the experience. Remember, kids, tools exist to make your life easier. If they don't, then don't use them. This is what worked for me and should work for anyone else planning a trip like this.
All right, Barron. It was good to talk with you. I'll see you again next week.
See you next week, Sean.
Barron still blogs at the-minuteman.org.
So our main topic this week is that very exciting and very uplifting topic of depression.
Didn't we cover this, like, back in episode 87 or something?
It was episode 52. It was a long time ago.
Oh, okay.
And we actually didn't really cover depression. What we covered was you did a fantastic segment. Go back to episode 52 and listen to it again. And you'll also get to listen to my father telling a story. Really cool, fun story, episode 52. But it was Erin talking about preparing for dealing with depression, not so much about what I really want to talk about, which is the intersection of depression and gun rights, mental health and gun rights. Because what do we hear all the time? Oh, we just got to take the guns away from the crazy people, right?
Oh, yeah, that'll just solve everything.
Well, yeah. We could just identify all the crazy people.
Yeah, see, there's this little problem known as due process and how you can't take rights away from people without it.
We don't need no stinking due process.
Well, that's what it's starting to look like, unfortunately.
Let me tell you. So I got a couple of articles that I'm going to put in the show notes. One was a little surprising. It's from Megan McArdle. Megan McArdle's usually pretty, squared away on things like this. It's not so much she's saying you shouldn't be allowed to own a gun. It's just it's like you shouldn't exercise that right. If you're depressed, you shouldn't buy a gun. Not so much you shouldn't be allowed, I guess, but you shouldn't buy a gun. Because, of course, depressed people kill themselves. I don't know. I killed myself. And I get depression. And I know a lot of people who get, I'm starting to think that just being depressed, getting depression, it's sort of like pretty much everybody does.
Well, yeah, everyone gets depressed on a regular basis because there are times when that is the sensible emotional reaction to it. I mean, a loved one dies, you're going to feel depressed. That makes sense. You lose your job, you're going to feel depressed. That makes sense. The problem is, well, you've got people like me who get depression on a cyclical basis. I can pretty much figure it out to the day within the month when I'm going to have it. Or you've got the people who, not to make light of this, but essentially get depressed for no damn reason whatsoever. It's just a chemical imbalance within their head. And this goes on for months or years. I think we're trying to make the difference between feeling depressed because something bad happened and you need to mourn and get over it, and the chronic or the long-term depression that people suffer from.
And I'm not talking about I get depressed if something bad happens. I'm like, I actually have depression at times. And as I talked about back in episode 52, since I've gotten married and I've had to start listening to somebody who lives in the same house with me and can say, well, maybe you ought to think about not laying on that couch and being a douche. I mean, she phrases a little better than that, but, maybe you should, not be such a big fat jerk and glower and be a snot. Yeah, you start to recognize the symptoms when they get pointed out to you. Hey, oh, well, yeah, okay.
So what you're saying is that your wife acts as an early warning system for you.
Oh, no, it's not early. I mean, it's just that I know that I had been depressed when I come out of it previously, and now it's like, okay, oh, I get it when I'm in it. It's once I recognize what's going on, I can take steps to correct the problem. But she can point it out to me where, of course, I can't necessarily see it.
Okay.
That's been very helpful. But does that mean I need to have my guns taken away from me? It's not like I'm a danger to myself or anybody else. And unless I get mad at you on Facebook and tell you I think you're an idiot. I mean, if that's a danger to you, well, then really that's your problem. I mean, seriously, if you can't take that, then maybe you're the one with the problem. But seriously, when they say things like 1 in 5 Americans suffers from mental illness, or nearly 1 in 5 suffer from mental illness, it is no longer an illness. That is now ordinary.
Yeah, that's 20% of the population.
It's 18.2 is the number they're giving. When you're down to nearly 1 in 5, if nearly 1 in 5 people in the United States had purple eyes, it would not be unusual.
Mm-hmm.
It would be a normal thing. You wouldn't even stare. You'd be like, I like chicks with purple eyes. Right? It'd be a thing.
Yeah.
So if you're lumping so many people into the mental illness category that you've gotten to the point where nearly 1 in 5 are mentally ill, they're not mentally ill. They're normal. They're just on the edge of the bell curve normal, but they're normal. So people like me, people like you, we're on the edge of the bell curve, but we're still on the normal edge of the bell curve.
Just for perspective here, it's estimated that about 6% of the United States population has red hair, just to give people an idea. So there are more depressed people than redheads.
And redheads are definitely a thing.
Absolutely, they're a thing.
When you were talking about yesterday, oh, I just don't want to deal with this. And you're talking a little bit about it on Facebook, and then you disappeared. I got to thinking about this, and I got to thinking about a post from Rob Allen, the guy who does our music, from, I forget how long ago it was. I couldn't remember how long ago I had read it, but it stuck with me for the longest time. And it turns out it's from 2013. It's called The Horse Gets Mighty Tired of Looking at the Cart When You Put It in Front of Him. And I want to read a little bit of this to you. I have a small beef with many of my fellow gun rights supporters, namely the seemingly knee-jerk reaction to point to the fact that all of the recent mass shooters were on some sort of SSRI medication. Of course they were. They were bug nuts crazy before the meds. That's why they were put on them, to try to control it. But the way many people speak of things like Paxil, Zoloft, and Lexapro, you'd think that little Johnny Kill-Em-All was a perfect choir boy who was just a little depressed because he was forced to consume 10 grams of mind-altering drugs the day before he suddenly went berserk. Rob suffers from anxiety and panic attacks, but he's not a danger to anybody. He has to take some of these things. Are we going to run down to his house and take his guns away? Seriously? Is that how far we've gotten? We're going to everybody who has to go to the doctor and take some sort of a SSRI or any kind of a, medication because they've got a chemical imbalance. We're going to that's the line in the sand we're going to draw. That's not how this works. If you're not ruled in a court of law to be a danger to yourself or others, if you're not convicted of a felony, then you don't lose your rights. And we need to take a very close look at how we are phrasing things, and worse than that, how we're letting other people phrase them. Listen to the people who want to take your rights away, and they are very clear about what they're doing. They know that nearly 1 in 5 Americans suffer from a mental illness. Ooh, we don't want those mentally ill people having guns. And then they're silently rubbing their hands in glee because they know that we're going to be stupid about this and say, oh, well, no, we don't want those people having guns. And then they're going to come around behind us and say, well, you've got depression. You're one of those 1 in 5. Give us your guns. You don't get your rights.
This is something that is just near and dear to my heart, and it really makes me upset for 2 reasons. Because on the one hand, you're being forced to choose, do I want to have good mental health and then give up a fundamental right, including the right to defend myself, or do I keep my right and have to suffer through this? And no one should have to make that choice. It is complete garbage. The other part about this is the blithe assumption that if we prevent the mentally ill from getting guns, that it's going to solve everything. Okay, so I've got depression. I'm not allowed to have a gun. Fine. But I'm allowed to go pilot a chemically fueled rocket down the interstate at 80 miles an hour, and that's perfectly okay. I mean, let's not even think about how many people I could take out with a car. But no, see, everyone drives a car. Cars are normal, but not everyone has a gun, so guns are scary and dangerous.
And I can take that incredibly powerful car and I could drive it to any station, any state, any city, not even show any kind of identification, even though I need this type of identification to even operate this motor vehicle. And I can purchase 10, 15, 20, 50 gallons of the explosive chemical fuel needed to power this rocket with no background check. And I can go into the same store that is connected to the fuel pump and purchase a lighter.
An incendiary device.
And then I can take that lighter and any amount. I can buy a container to put this chemical fuel in. I can take that and I can pour it all over the steps to the unlicensed nightclub in the Bronx because one of the girls in there pissed me off. And I can burn the place down and kill 87 people.
And this was the 1990 Happy Land club fire, wasn't it?
It was, in fact. That guy just died in September of a heart attack in prison.
Not soon enough.
When you start hearing these stories about mentally ill, we need to separate them from weapons, remember who specifically they're talking about when they're talking about mentally ill people. Because when they start trying to expand that mentally ill to include 1 in 5 or nearly 1 in 5 Americans, they're trying to expand it to me. They're trying to expand it to Erin. They're trying to expand it to regular, ordinary people who go, I don't want to get out of bed because depressed. They're not talking about the people who are off their nut. They're not talking about people who are violent, who are dangerous. They're talking about people who just don't feel good and don't want to deal with crap. They're talking about people like Rob Allen, who's not a danger to anybody. But if they can figure out a way to leverage the mental health system to take away your rights, well, they're just like the Soviets. They'll use whatever they can.
We don't stigmatize the flu. We don't stigmatize cancer. Why are we stigmatizing the equivalent of flu for the brain? I don't get it.
I don't get it either.
Earlier this week, our own Tiffany Johnson went to New York to address the United Nations on the topic of personal security as a global human right. In her segment, she's going to tell us all about it.
You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view. Till you climb inside of his skin, walk around in it.
Hey guys, so I really enjoyed last week's show and hearing you both talk about what all you did to survive the dreaded hurricane. And of course, it goes without saying that I am ecstatic to hear that you both weathered the storm just fine and that Erin's parents are just fine. And so I'm glad that everything worked out. I, myself, went through a bit of a hurricane of a week in the last week or so as well. I'm excited to talk to you guys about that, but there's a lot of moving parts to this story, so I'm going to try to get through it quickly, so strap in, buckle up. Here we go. First, let's back up a few weeks to the Gun Rights Policy Conference down in Tampa. Tom and Lynn and I were down in Tampa, and one of the people that Tom introduced me to was Major General Alan Youngman. He's so nice. He's so inviting, so welcoming, not intimidating at all, just the easiest guy in the world to talk to. At some point after we had had several conversations and had gotten somewhat chummy, General Youngman pulled me out into the hallway at the policy conference. And I was a little bit taken aback, wasn't sure what was happening. Well, when we got out there, I was met by 3 or 4 tall, slim, very distinguished looking gentlemen in very expensive looking suits. So I was like, okay, either I'm about to be, swept away by Homeland Security or something else really interesting is about to happen. Long story short, these guys, they were all serving in some way or another as liaisons to the United Nations in New York. And so General Youngman asked me if I would be interested in speaking at the United Nations, which of course blew me away. I was thrilled to even be considered, totally flattered to even have him ask me that, especially after having only met me about 30 minutes earlier. Wonderful dream, but I wasn't super confident that it would actually come to fruition, especially since it was so late notice. The UN hearing that he wanted me to attend was about 2 weeks later. And I was supposed to be in San Antonio for a conference where I was not only presenting twice, but I was also serving as co-chair of the conference committee. So I didn't have a lot of hope that this was going to happen. Fast forward a couple of days and several emails and phone calls later, and here I am scrambling to put together a last-minute ticket to New York because it was in fact happening. So problem number 1, as you might have guessed, is you can't take any gear into New York, anything at all, like not even pepper spray. So that was a bit disconcerting, but luckily Tom had apparently made an arrangement with General Youngman to sort of be my kind of inconspicuous protection detail. Because of course, when you have the title of Major General and you serve at the UN, then you get special privileges that lowly folks from Memphis, Tennessee don't get. So with that in mind, I found myself in New York traipsing around. I was introduced to another gentleman named Tom Mason, who is with the World Forum on Shooting Activities. And I met some other folks from other countries, Canada, Germany, Italy, all gun people. So it was really, really interesting. I had my first experience at a super swank restaurant. It was overlooking Central Park. It was a private club in Manhattan. Of course, I was way out of my element. I had absolutely no business being there. And I can only hope that nobody noticed me standing out like a sore thumb. But I tried to, flail my way through it. And hopefully I did okay. So the big day arrived, and this was Wednesday. I was at the UN for most of the day. This place is awesome. The room is massive. It looks just like it does on television. I'm kind of, awestruck and just a bit in disbelief that I'm even here. I'm just really overwhelmed by the whole situation. And so eventually we go through all the speakers. This is at the NGO hearing. So there are several speakers. The first few were talking about nuclear arms, right? That's out of my wheelhouse, above my pay grade. Don't know anything about it. I'm glad I wasn't asked to speak about that. But then they moved on to small arms policy. And the first several speakers who were against small arms were from a group called IANSA, which is the International Action Network on Small Arms. And so as they put forth one speaker after another, they were extremely diverse. They were young, they were vibrant, they were relatable, they were sympathetic. All of them told very personal stories. One young lady told of how she escaped from, I believe it was Kenya, and went to Nigeria after her parents were persecuted. And of course, she was impliedly blaming all of this on the proliferation of small arms. There was another gentleman who was also African. I can't remember what country he was from, but he talked very passionately about why guns are a scourge on modern society. And I could tell that these folks had really grabbed the attention of the room. Everybody was listening to them. So then we had a few folks to speak on behalf of, I'm doing my air quotes now, the gun industry. And most came from subsets of this global organization called the World Forum on Shooting Activities, which was also sponsoring me. There's a gentleman from Germany, and he talked about the recreational and economic benefits of guns, which kind of made me cringe because I'm like, that can't be your argument after this lady just stood up and talked about how her parents were mowed down in the street in Nigeria. We got to do better than that on the argument front. All right. So there was another guy who talked about how much fun it is to shoot and, again, harping on recreation. All of that stuff is true, but I just wasn't sure it was the most effective argument. And I didn't see any of the UN delegates paying particularly close attention as those speakers were going. So I took a different route with my little 3-minute spiel. And instead of spouting the typical NRA talking points, I spoke in very personal terms about what guns have meant to me in my life and how I started out being deathly afraid of them and, kind of rabidly anti-gun, and how I evolved and, what prompted that evolution and how I started learning and talking to people and expanding my own boundaries and broadening my perspective, if you will, and how that led to me respecting the awesome power that deadly force involves while still understanding its practical use to individuals as a means of self-protection. And I talked about how my best friend was killed in a home invasion many years ago, which was obviously a life-changing event for me, very traumatic event for me. And I know that there are a lot of people who are anti-gun because of a similar traumatic event, because of some sort of gun-related loss of a loved one. And so I reflected on that story from my background just to show that, there are other ways to react to losing a person in gun violence. And I hate that phrase. I'm struggling to find a better phrase to use, gun violence. Guns don't commit violence, but hopefully you guys get my drift. But I wanted to show that, some people react by hating guns, but other people react by saying, okay, what could we have done to stop this, to mitigate this, to prevent this from happening? And that's what pushed me towards firearms rather than away from them. When I think about my best friend being gunned down in his home, the only thing I can ask myself is, how would that situation have differed if he had been armed at the time? So those are some of the things that pushed me, that fueled my curiosity about firearms and about personal defensive tools. And that's what kept me learning and coming back for more. And so I tried to channel all of that into this speech that I gave at the UN. And I talked about how that even applies to my colleagues who had just spoken before me, the young lady from Kenya and the gentleman from, again, I can't remember what country in Africa he was from, but they talked about being persecuted. And so, again, my stance on firearms is not counter to theirs. In fact, I think it could be useful in their situation because, after all, there are many countries where the populace is simply left to defend itself with whatever it has available, where there are criminal assailants, there are governments, all the people with more power than them are free to arm themselves with whatever weapons they choose. And that's just fundamentally unfair. So anyway, I had the toughest time cutting down everything I wanted to say into 3 minutes. And the end product obviously left out a lot of things that I wanted to say. But one of my main goals was to stay away from predictable talking points because that just causes people's eyes to glaze over. When I did talk about my personal experiences, one thing that I noticed was that people looked up. I mean, there were hundreds of delegates in the room from all over the world, and they were pretty much, kind of doing their own thing because these speeches, they're not going to change anybody's mind. They're just more of a formality. And so people are occupied with, checking their phones, and you'd be surprised how many screens I saw with Facebook pulled up at the United Nations. But throughout my little 3 minutes, I did notice people stopping what they were doing and turning to look. I'm not sure when they had heard someone talk about firearms in a personal way, because the impression that I had gotten from all of the folks who attempted to prepare me for this address was that most of the pro-gun speeches were about the economic and recreational benefits of guns, and that self-defense really doesn't sell much internationally. So I don't know, maybe I was stepping out of my lane by going there, but that's where I went. And at the very least, folks listened. I think they did. Even the chairman of the committee was looking me in the eye as I spoke, which impressed me. It made me nervous. It was very intimidating because he hadn't looked at many of the other speakers. So it was awesome to have his attention, if only for a few fleeting moments. Afterwards, I got a chance to mingle a bit. I took the time to go and shake the hands of those two folks that I was so moved by, the ones who talked about being persecuted in Africa. I exchanged contact information with them. Even though we're on opposite sides of the spectrum in terms of small arms policy, I'm hoping to keep in touch and maybe engage in a dialogue with them in the future. I've already heard back from one of the speakers that I emailed. So anyway, that wasn't the end of my week. It was still only halfway done. So as soon as I finished at the UN, I went back to the hotel, jumped into bed, and I had to get up at 3 o'clock the next morning to hop on a plane to go to San Antonio for the conference that I was supposed to be attending for the entire week. So here we go.
In the southern part of Texas, in the town of San Antonio, is a fortress all in ruins that the weeds have overgrown.
So, got to San Antonio like 11 o'clock in the morning. This was an academic teaching conference, and the session that I was presenting was on campus security. So the whole idea of firearms, the whole idea of embracing violence as an offensive tool or a defensive tool is not particularly well received in academia. So I knew to expect to have to walk on eggshells a bit. It was a delicate balancing act to turn this session into something that they could use in spite of some of their preconceived notions about firearms, defense, that sort of thing. So then I reached out to Craig Douglas, shivworks.com, and Craig helped me to connect with Mike Anderson at shootthegun.com. I knew Mike. I had met him before. I had never trained with him. It just turned out to be a perfect match. Mike was generous enough to come down to San Antonio from his home in Minnesota, and he and I worked together to present this seminar on campus security at my teaching conference. And it went over really, really well. But interestingly, one lady came up to me afterwards and said she shared an anecdote about a student of hers who called in to say she wouldn't make it to class because she had been jumped by a group of other girls. And this teacher, this college professor was saying to me, I don't understand that. I can't wrap my head around why anyone would resort to violence as a means of solving problems. So first of all, I'm kind of scratching my head like, lady, where did you grow up? But then that was my instinctive reaction. But then I had to step back and remind myself that, hey, there are cultural differences here. Not everybody has the same background, same mindset. And we as trainers really need to think hard about how to reach folks who don't instinctively embrace violence. How to reach folks for whom violence never occurs to them as a means to any particular end, right? And so we had to cross that bridge. And there was another woman who raised her hand in the middle of the seminar and said, oh my goodness, my school, and I think it's a school in Texas where she taught, my school just passed a law that says that you can carry guns on campus. There are going to be guns on our campus. What do I do? And that was literally her question. What do I do? She was terrified. And so Mike brilliantly addressed the question. He and I both spoke to this woman and we suggested that she actually take a gun class. I mean, it was clear to us that she was not comfortable with firearms. And so I wasn't expecting her to be excited about that. But what I said to her was, you don't have to shoot, right? I'm not suggesting that you take a gun class in order to become the next Annie Oakley. What I'm saying is take the gun class and focus on the classroom portion. Find a reputable trainer who can teach you about gun safety and take a safety course just so that you can familiarize yourself with the mechanics, with the basics, with the safety rules for handling firearms. And then you'll feel a lot more comfortable about knowing that you work in an environment where people around you are carrying concealed weapons. And she was actually really receptive to that. She had absolutely no interest in learning how to shoot whatsoever. But Mike and I are going to hold out hope that, maybe she'll catch the bug just like I did. I never expected to. But I hope that she will take our advice and go and take that class. That had never occurred to her. The look on her face was like, wow, I never would have taken a gun class because it's just not something that I'm interested in. But I hope she does take that advice, and I hope she finds it as empowering as I found it. After we finished at San Antonio, oh, and by the way, I did get to go to the Alamo. Yay! It was really, really fascinating to go there. I took the listening tour. I lingered on the grounds for a while. Very sobering to hear those stories again. It's one thing to hear it in high school, in history class. It's another thing to actually be on the grounds. So that was awesome. But then it was time for me to hop on a plane back to Memphis. I got to Memphis on, I think, Saturday night at like 10 o'clock, and I was exhausted. But boy, had it been a hurricane of a week. In 6 days, I had been to the United Nations in New York, so I'm hoping to be invited back. Fingers crossed, really hoping I get to do that again. And at the teaching conference, I was reappointed to serve another year as chair of the conference committee. So that will hopefully present more opportunities to offer seminars on safety in the teaching environment. I think the campuses focus a little too much probably on active killer situations because that's what's sensational in the news. What's far more likely to confront a teacher, your average teacher on a university campus, is interpersonal violence or civil unrest, especially in these days of contentious elections and controversial police shootings and protests and that sort of stuff. I'm hoping that Mike Anderson will indulge me and consider potentially revamping this campus safety seminar to present in other venues. And I'm really looking forward to that. Thanks so much for listening. And until next time, keep it centered and even. Everybody stay safe. And again, thank you so much to all of the people in my family and my circle of friends who chipped in over the last week to help me somehow manage to be in like 9 different places at the same time. I really appreciate you guys. Oh, and kudos to Tim Reedy and his much better half, Amy Kissling, for hosting me in San Antonio, taking me to dinner, hanging out, and providing much needed loaner equipment while I was there. Thanks, and I'll talk to you next week.
You can follow Tiffany at frontsightpress.com.
And now it's time for Blue Collar Prepping with that bratty kid sister of the gun blogosphere, Erin Paulette.
Come on, every pony. It's time for Blue Collar Prepping with Erin Paulette.
So as I mentioned in the introductory banter, this past week has been pretty rough for me, and apparently for a lot of other people as well. I don't know if it's the change in weather, or the poop-slinging crap fest that is this election, or something else entirely, but many of my friends have felt moody, irritable, and downright misanthropic lately. Last weekend, I started to get one of my periodic cravings to withdraw from the world. It doesn't happen very often for me, maybe every 3 to 6 months, and for about 5 days, I just want to be left alone and not deal with people at all. During these periods, which I see as a time of renewal, like a field lying fallow, I just keep to myself and I catch up on my sleep and my reading. It's basically a staycation, only inside my bedroom. Now, everyone needs some alone time, and I wrote a great article about this on Blue Collar Prepping, which I encourage people to read. But just when I thought I had come out of it and was ready to face the world and deal with people again, it felt like depression crept up behind me and hit me with a knockout blow. And I'm not sure what caused it, but since many of my friends are having similar issues and are blaming it on the change of seasons, I figure now will be a good time to talk about seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, which is a fitting acronym. Very simply, SAD is a kind of depression that happens when the seasons change. It's most common during the fall and winter, although spring and summer SAD also happen. About 5% of the U.S. population suffer from it, either summer or winter versions. SAD usually manifests during puberty, like so many awful things, and it is more common in women than in men. The spring and summer version, which I'm not very familiar with, has these symptoms: insomnia, anxiety, irritability, decreased appetite, weight gain or loss, social withdrawal, and decreased sex drive. Now, the fall and winter version is something I'm very well acquainted with because my mother has it, and the symptoms for this are difficulty waking up in the morning, nausea, tendency to oversleep, a craving for carbohydrates, which leads to overeating and weight gain, a lack of energy, difficulty concentrating on or completing tasks, withdrawal from friends, family, and social activities, and decreased sex drive. So, fun all around. Now, some of you may be wondering what this has to do with preparedness, and the answer is twofold. One, SAD is something that can be treated and possibly even prevented with a bit of foresight, so it's something that can be prepared against. And two, during a long-term disaster, depression is going to be an issue, whether it's seasonal or otherwise. And it's good to know these things because it might not be possible to see a doctor during a crisis. So, here's what you can do to prevent seasonal affective disorder and possibly other forms of depression as well. Exercise. You don't even have to get all sweaty or feel the burn, dude. Although, if you want to do that, more power to you. Just a 30-minute walk outdoors will help. Both the exercise of walking and the exposure to sunlight, even winter sunlight, will help boost your serotonin levels. Now, I talked about serotonin back in episode 87, but the short version is that it's the chemical in your brain that creates feelings of happiness and well-being. Get plenty of vitamin D3. This is the vitamin which your skin creates via exposure to sunlight, which is why I suggested that 30-minute walk during the day. But if you're trying to prevent SAD, you might as well use a belt and suspenders approach. Also, if you're suffering from summer SAD and you really don't want to be out in the sun, this is a good way to get that much-needed vitamin. I currently take gel capsules of D3 that I get from the vitamin shop, and they provide me with 5,000 IU daily. Find things that make you happy and do them. And I know this might seem like a well-duh solution, but I know from experience that when I'm feeling tired and grouchy, I don't go out of my way to make myself happy. So find something that brings you joy or laughter and indulge in it. Hang out with friends, watch a comedy, get a massage so that you feel better both physically and you get that personal physical touch. All of these are recommended ways to cheer someone up. And finally, and this is more for the winter SAD than the summer, you may find out that you need a light therapy lamp, aka a happy light. People with winter SAD need 24 times more light during the winter months than people without the condition, and therapy lamps provide a lot of light. Daily exposure to this light should help fight seasonal depression. Now, I don't think I have seasonal affective disorder because it's supposed to manifest during puberty, and I have always loved the fall and cooler weather and nighttime, and I also live in Florida where it's sunny a lot, so I'm certainly not lacking for vitamin D3 and sunlight exposure, but I've gone ahead and bought a Happy Lamp from Amazon. The one I ordered and is listed in the show notes has a 4.5-star rating, and it's only $50. And so I'm going to see if it helps me get through this election funk. If it works, great. And if not, I can always give it to my mom.
That's a nice thing for you to do.
Hey, Mom, you've been kind of grouchy and feeling sad lately. Here's a lamp.
Better than a flower. That'll die. Here's a lamp. It'll work for longer. Not only can you subscribe or donate to the podcast, you can also make a contribution to the LGBT Training Ammo Fund. Go to gunblogvarietycast.com and click on the LGBT Training Ammo Fund donation button in the right sidebar. I'll use this money to pay for range fees, targets, and yes, ammo for the people I teach. And thanks for your support. Once again, Weird Fisk's Dan Savage of the Savage Lovecast on his view on guns. This week, reacting to a statement by Donald Trump in This Week in Anti-Gun Nuttery. Well, hey, Weird, what do you got for me this week?
So in episode 517 of the Savage Lovecast, again, one of my favorite podcasts, Dan Savage reacts to this Trump statement.
Now, you know she's very much against the Second Amendment. She wants to destroy your Second Amendment. Guns, 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 right? I think what we should do is she goes around with armed bodyguards like you have never seen before. I think that her bodyguards should drop all weapons. They should disarm, right? Right? I think they should disarm immediately. What do you think? Yes? Yes. Yeah. Take their guns away. She doesn't want guns. Let's see what happens to her.
Yet another ineloquent Trump statement. His point's a little silly, as Hillary doesn't have a say on how the Secret Service protects her. And there are many accounts of her butting heads with the agents on her detail. The last time she had any control over her security was when she was the First Lady of Arkansas, and back then her and Bill left gun owners well enough alone. Dan's reaction is quite interesting.
This isn't the first time Donald Trump has suggested that Hillary Clinton's Secret Service detail disarm. This is the first time he floated this idea, let's see what happens to her, ... Essentially what he's doing there is inciting violence against Hillary Clinton.
So Trump, according to Savage, is inciting violence against Hillary Clinton by that let's see what happens statement. I think that's poppycock. But if Dan really believes that, why does he close his rant with this statement?
Don't take their guns away, Donald. Let them carry, open carry, in your White House. Let's see what happens to you then.
So either he's a liar or he wants violent actions taken against Donald Trump. I'll let you decide which one it is. Now, of course, Dan couldn't talk about guns without talking about gun laws.
I'm one of those Americans who would like to see the Second Amendment repealed and everybody's guns grabbed. But Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton are not those Americans. They don't agree with me on this. They are for reasonable, sane gun control, not disarming Americans. All Obama and Hillary want to do is make guns a little bit harder to get, just a tiny little bit, so that bad guys and deranged guys have a slightly harder time getting their bad, deranged hands on guns.
But what have President Obama and Secretary Clinton said on the matter?
A couple of decades ago, Australia had a mass shooting, similar to Columbine or Newtown. And Australia just said, well, that's it. We're not seeing that again. And basically imposed very severe, tough gun laws, and they haven't had a mass shooting since. I mean, our levels of gun violence are off the charts. There's no advanced, developed country on earth that would put up with this.
The Australian government, as part of trying to clamp down on the availability of automatic weapons, offered a good price for buying hundreds of thousands of guns. They believed, and I think the evidence supports them, that by offering to buy back those guns, they were able to, curtail the supply and to set a different standard for gun purchases in the future. So I think that's worth considering.
So in fact, President Obama and Hillary Clinton say wonderful things about the gun laws enacted in Australia after Port Arthur. Of course, these cuts weren't the only time they've said as such. And what did Australians do? They banned all semi-auto rifles and shotguns, as well as pump actions, and they put huge restrictions on what handguns Aussies could own. And they had a mandatory buyback, meaning the guns that weren't turned in were subject to confiscation. Clinton and Obama have said similar glowing praise to other nations who passed similar laws. Dan Savage has had his fair share of controversies, but his views on guns and gun ownership doesn't even make any of these lists. Gun bans are a core platform of the progressive movement, but being candid about this appears not to be on this platform. I wonder why.
Let's set aside for a moment the fact that keeping guns in your home makes your family less safe.
Kellerman study, bogus. Moving on.
Because their argument is that guns make us safer. And the problem isn't that there are too many guns rattling around in this country, but too few. And we need good guys with guns to take out bad guys with guns. And if only everyone in that movie theater or that classroom or that classroom or that classroom or that classroom had a gun, then the good guys could have stopped the bad guy.
That's a straw man. No Second Amendment supporter has claimed everybody needs a gun. That's always been something said exclusively by anti-gun nuts and always in context of removing rights to guns and or the right to carry. Of course, the elephant in the room is Dan references movie theaters and classrooms. Oddly enough, the shootings that have happened there have happened in places that ban guns. So you can say it with an incredulous tone, but violent criminals and lunatics seek out gun-free zones, Dan, and they do it for a reason.
So it seems to me that Donald Trump and every last Republican who has run or may run or one day might be president should announce that on day one, they're going to remove the metal detectors from the White House grounds and allow Americans to carry loaded guns into the White House. And right now, Donald Trump can not disarm his Secret Service detail, but stop requiring people who attend his rallies to pass through metal detectors and not show up at his rallies and carry into his rallies guns.
So it's a little more complicated than that, as the metal detectors aren't a Trump policy, but part of the Secret Service's security protocols. In theory, the protocols could be amended, either to remove all pre-existing restrictions on lawful carry around candidates or elected officials, no matter what their party or stance on guns are, or allow candidates to amend the protocols of their own detail. The idea of such a drastic change is really dubious. Still, is there a place where lawful gun owners are allowed to rub elbows with elected officials without entering a sterile area? Why, yes! Check out the show notes for a link to some research done by Dr. John Lott's Crime Prevention Research Center. The study is called 18 State Capitals Officially Allow, and at least 21 Allow in Practice, Some Form of Legal Firearms Carry. The criteria for this study is a little different than what Dan is suggesting. So by my count, there are 14 state capitol buildings where anybody who can legally carry on the sidewalk outside the capitol can legally carry inside the building, even when the legislature is in session, and even meet with their local representation if they so choose. And can we point to the problems? Well, Gabby Giffords was shot by an insane person. But that was at a strip mall, and if her staff hadn't subdued him so quickly, there was a man lawfully carrying there who was prepared to shoot him. And there was that terrorist attack on the Capitol building in 2014. What town was that? Oh yeah, Ottawa. So suffice to say, the answer to what might happen is a big fat nothing. If anti-gunners could use facts or logic, they'd probably just be pro-gun.
All right, Weird. It was good to talk with you. I'll see you again next week.
See you next week, Sean.
In addition to appearing here, Weird is a regular host on The Squirrel Report and blogs at weirdworld.com. That's WEERD world.com.
Our plug of the week this week is for hunting. I thought, well, I'll go out and shoot a deer because my wife wants some venison, but, how much fun can this possibly be? And for almost 2.5 hours, I was thinking this has got to be the most boring thing I've ever done. And the previous sitting out on a tree stand, it was pretty freaking boring. But when it wasn't boring, it was really freaking exciting. It was pretty crazy. So if you've never gone hunting, if you've even slightly thought about hunting, I absolutely recommend it. It is hard to really describe. It's actually quite exciting when you get to the point where the deer shows his face. There's a lot of work that goes into it, cleaning it up and then trying to figure out how to cook it to something that was decent. Thank goodness my wife knows how to turn it from large parts of deer to like chunks of meat. I have no idea what to do there. Find somebody who can mentor you. Like, thank goodness Jeff knew what he was doing. He could tell me. And again, I hope he's doing well and will recover quickly. And I'll try to get some more information so that next week I can let you all know how he's doing. But if you've never hunted, it is a lot different than you might expect. And all the people who tell you, oh no, it's very exciting, it's interesting, and you're thinking, how can it be? It's just like sitting there and then something shows up and you shoot it. How could it be exciting? It is. So what I've got is a link to wheretohunt.org, which is the National Shooting Sports Foundation's website that links to all of the state level organizations, the state level whatever passes for a hunter safety organizations, the hunter education, the game warden, whatever you call them in your territory, your state, whatever. Check it out, wheretohunt.org. It's a service of the National Shooting Sports Foundation. Well, that's our show for the week. Remember that the GunBlog VarietyCast is a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.
Find the show notes at gunblogvarietycast.com/episode 114.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the GunBlog VarietyCast. Music courtesy of Rob Allen at blog.roballen.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and Google Play Music. This podcast is made possible by the Firearms Policy Coalition and by contributions from listeners like you. This is a URS production.